So I wanted to talk to you tonight about this week's Torah portion. I wanted to talk to you about all kinds of things, but since we're in synagogue and it's Shabbat and Friday night, I think it's more relevant to talk about the Torah portion. We are at Vayechi, which is the last Torah portion of the book of Genesis. And it ends the narrative of Jacob and his clan and his sons and daughters and wives who have escaped famine in the land of Canaan and have found refuge in Egypt. Jacob was really, really reluctant to go because he knew from Abraham, his grandfather, and then from Isaac, his father, what would befall his people if at any point he and his progeny went to Egypt, because Abraham was shown a vision that his people would be enslaved for 400 years in the land of Egypt. So you can understand that Jacob wasn't really too keen on going. It took for God to appear to him and tell him that not to worry, it'll be fine. Just go. And you'll be dead, so 400 years. That's not exactly how the dialogue went, but I'm adding to it. And it's really a powerful narrative because we follow up until this week the narrative of Joseph, who, if you remember, was the favorite of all the children, of all the sons, because he was born to Rachel, who was the wife Jacob loved most. Nothing like destroying families by playing favorites, which is what happened. In fact, because the other brothers were jealous of, not just because Joseph was the favorite, but because he also was, in his youth, very narcissistic, and he kind of showed off his specialness to his siblings, which obviously made them even more angry at him. And ultimately, if you remember from the story, they sell him into slavery to a caravan of slave merchants that happened to pass by as they were walking the flock in the fields away from camp. And they pretended back to camp to their father Jacob that in fact his favorite son had been killed, devoured by a beast. And so the story of Joseph is a glorious, beautiful story of a being who starts life through his teenage years, as I said, deeply narcissistic, but through the travails of life, he's really made to open his heart and to open his consciousness. I'm not going to go through all that happens to him. A lot happens to him through this time, and he matures and he grows in a deep spirituality, to the point where just last week's Torah portion. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but then I'll trace my steps back. He eventually, after all of the adventures that happened to him, comes to be second in command in Egypt. He is hired by Pharaoh to be his prime minister, basically, and to run the kingdom on Pharaoh's behalf. So he's come to be in a place of power, but from a place of deep humility that has been part of his maturation through the years. He feels himself to be a channel for something greater happening through him. And you see that when his brothers, who think of him dead, since no one really survived being sold into slavery, come to beg at the court of Pharaoh for a little bit of food, since there was famine in Canaan, to sustain their families. And Joseph reveals himself to them. I'm making a long story short. And as he reveals himself to his brothers who sought to kill him, you can imagine that the brothers were not feeling really optimistic about what might happen. They thought maybe their brother was, now that he's got the full power of the throne of Egypt, might enact a revenge against them. He doesn't. And what he tells them, and I wrote it down here, he tells them not to be afraid of him. He invites them in and opens his heart to them, forgives them, and not just forgives them. He tells them it was, and I quote, "It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you, to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives. So it wasn't you who sent me. It wasn't you who sent me here, it was God." Right? He's basically telling them that though they might have thought that they had that autonomous act of will in trying to kill him, for him it became really clear over the years that not at all. They were just unbeknownst to them in service of a greater purpose that God orchestrated through them. And that's really how he comes to see the world, how he comes to see a reality. For him, this is really clear that he and everyone are just channels for a greater energy, a greater truth that is unfolding through each and every one of us, through each and every life, human life. You know, we love to believe ourselves in charge. We're in control of our lives. We make decisions that, we carve for ourselves a path forward. But really we are not doing that. I mean, it's a beautiful illusion, but none of us exists in a vacuum. And whatever decision we make has consequences to anything and everything around us. And oftentimes, even the decisions we make are influenced by things that we are not even sometimes conscious of, that are moving us to make a decision, whatever that means. And so for Joseph, it's all of the whatever that means is a divine underlying current, a flow, a shefa that moves through everything and carries not the individual stories, but the meta story of the divine unfolding, of the divine growing up, of the divine evolving through us as us. And the first marker of that awakening for Joseph was two more Torah portions before, where at the time he's been jailed, one of these adventures. He's been thrown into to Pharaoh's jails, and because he was able to interpret dreams, he was a Jungian therapist. He was trained as a Jungian therapist from old age, and he was able to really interpret dreams. That was his gift. And so he does that for his friends in the jail, and when one of them is liberated and get his job back at Pharaoh's court, he whispers in Pharaoh's ear that this dream that Pharaoh just had could be translated and interpreted by this guy back in jail, who is this Jungian therapist, and he's really good. I wonder how you say Jungian in Egyptian, or you write it in hieroglyphs. All right, next time. And so Joseph is brought out of jail and comes to Pharaoh's court in front of Pharaoh's diviners. He's wearing rags and probably hasn't groomed himself for months, And Pharaoh tells him the dream that he had. And in the moment of responding to Pharaoh's request to explain to Pharaoh what his dream was, which I'm not going to tell you because it's too long, but the Torah says, Vaya'an Yosef et Paro lemor Biladai. Elohim ya'aneh et shlom Paro. Literally, he says, the Torah says, and Joseph answered Pharaoh's request, saying, Biladai. So usually that gets translated as not I. Elohim ya'aneh et shlom Paro. God will God will answer to the peace of Pharaoh. That's what the Hebrew says. But that's not what Joseph says. Joseph says, Biladai. Now, Biladai is a fascinating word in Hebrew. It means without me. So it's very different from the irregular translation that says, not I, God will do it. No, Joseph says, Biladai, without me. Like without a little me. Like what Joseph is telling us, that he awakened to an understanding that there is no such a thing as a me. Biladai, there is no me, there is no self. There is no such a thing as a separate self. And so because of that, obviously, I am just a channel for the divine to explain to Pharaoh what the dream is. But that's happening biladai. That's happening without me, without I, without a self that is involved in any way in the speaking of the interpretation of the dream. I'm just, there is no owner of these words. Nobody is speaking. Nobody is saying anything. There is no one there. We're just talking leaves on the tree of life, speaking and singing the song of the divine. And that's just a profound awakening, a profound realization that Joseph, in just that one word, conveys to us. I've actually used this as a mantra for a year plus now, to remind myself, Biladai, this moment, these words that I am not saying, that you are not hearing, because there is no me and there is no you, is just one talking to another one, which is not two. How many have I lost so far? You've heard me say that before. You're used to this crazy talk. But I'm really touching at something real if you just look inside. And we're going to do that in a meditation in just a moment. Because I'm going to invite you to find yourself, if you can. I know the answer. Biladai, this moment happening without a me. It's deeply mystical, obviously deeply Kabbalistic, but it's really an important truth, because it tells you and me, tells us that reality, this reality we seem to inhabit, is an impersonal reality. Not only it is an ever-changing reality, but it is also impersonal. It doesn't have you as a person as part of it. And with that, we still want to glom on to everything remaining the same, even though reality is ever changing. And we still want to hold on to this sense of me-ness, even though reality is impersonal. It's the ways we resist life. It's the ways we resist life, we resist reality, which is what makes us so miserable. causes so much pain. In the narrative that is unfolding in the next book, the book of Exodus, is the Jewish awakening to the Jewish four noble truths. There is enslavement, which is the narrative that begins next week. There is enslavement. We are enslaved to this notion of separateness. We are enslaved to our resisting the fact that everything always changes, that nothing ever is solid or permanent. Everything is impermanent. We are enslaved to this notion that there is a me, there is a self, that we have to defend, that we have to somehow fulfill, make happy. That's the enslavement. And that enslavement is the second noble truth. There is suffering, because from that constriction comes the suffering, the pain. But then the third noble truth is the story of the Exodus. There is a way out. There is redemption. There is a way out of Egypt. And then after that, there is revelation at Sinai, which is awakening to the oneness of it all. It's a little bit different than the Buddhist Four Noble Truth. They have suffering first. We have enslavement first. But other than that, they look really much the same, obviously, because we're all talking at a certain level about the same truths. Because truth is one. Which leads me to introducing the next song. That song is going to be on page 19.